The cold metal floor of the holding cell had become familiar to Danny Cole over the past 3 weeks, and he had memorized every crack, every stain, every scratch on the walls that surrounded him like a tomb. He was a cargo pilot, nothing more and nothing less. A man who made his living hauling supplies between stations and colonies in the outer sectors of the galaxy. He had never broken a law in his life, never smuggled contraband, never cheated a customer. But none of that mattered to the Vexari who had seized his ship and thrown him into this cell. The Vexari were a reptilian species, with scales the color of dry blood and eyes like chips of yellow ice. They ruled this sector of space with an iron grip, and their justice system was famous throughout the galaxy, not for its fairness, but for its cruelty. Danny had heard the stories before he ever entered Vexari space. Stories of prisoners sentenced to death for minor offenses. Stories of executions carried out in ways that made other species look away in horror. He had thought those stories were exaggerations, tales told to frighten travelers into paying their tariffs on time. Now he knew better. The door to his cell hissed open, and 2 Vexari guards stepped inside, their clawed feet clicking against the floor. Between them stood Commander Sethrak, the officer who had personally overseen Danny's arrest and imprisonment. Sethrak was tall even by Vexari standards, with a long scar running down the left side of his face and a permanent expression of contempt carved into his features. "The tribunal has reached its verdict," Sethrak said, his voice cold and flat like stone scraping against stone. Danny pushed himself to his feet, his muscles aching from weeks of sleeping on the hard floor. "I told you 100 times," he said, keeping his voice steady even though his heart was pounding. "I never smuggled anything. My cargo manifest was clean. My ship was clean. You found nothing because there was nothing to find." Sethrak tilted his head, studying Danny the way a predator might study a particularly uninteresting piece of prey. "The tribunal disagrees," he said. "You have been found guilty of smuggling contraband through Vexari space, and your sentence has been decided." "What sentence?" Danny asked, though part of him already knew the answer would be something terrible. "Abandonment," Sethrak said. And for the first time, something like pleasure flickered in his yellow eyes. "You will be taken to the surface of Morith 7 and left there. Your survival will be in your own hands." Danny felt his blood turn to ice. He had heard of Morith 7. Everyone in this sector had heard of it. It was a death world, a planet of endless jungles and perpetual darkness where massive predators called Shadowmaws hunted anything that moved. No one survived Morith 7. Not Vexari soldiers, not hardened criminals, not anyone. The longest anyone had ever lasted on the surface was 18 hours. "That is not justice," Danny said, his voice rising. "That is murder. You are sentencing me to be eaten alive for a crime I did not commit." Sethrak stepped closer, his face inches from Danny's. "You are human," he said, spitting the word like it was something foul. "Your species is weak, soft, pathetic. You do not belong in this part of the galaxy. And Morith 7 will prove that once and for all." The guards grabbed Danny's arms and dragged him from the cell before he could respond. They hauled him through the corridors of the prison station, past other cells filled with other prisoners who watched in silence as he passed. Everyone knew what abandonment meant. Everyone knew where he was going, and no one said a word because there was nothing to say. The shuttle bay was cold and sterile, lit by harsh white lights that made everything look like it was made of bone. Small transport shuttle sat waiting on the landing pad, its engines already humming with power. The guards threw Danny inside and strapped him into a seat, then stepped back as Sethrak entered the shuttle. "I want to see his face when he realizes what waits for him," Sethrak said to the pilot. "Take us down." The shuttle lifted off and descended through the atmosphere of Morith 7, and Danny watched through the small window as the prison station grew smaller and smaller above them below. The planet was a mass of black and green, covered in thick jungle that seemed to stretch on forever. There was no sun visible, only a dim gray light that filtered through the heavy clouds. And Danny realized that this world existed in a state of permanent twilight. The shuttle touched down in a small clearing, and the rear hatch opened with a hiss of hydraulic. Sethrak grabbed Danny by the collar and dragged him to the edge of the ramp. "Here is your new home, human," Sethrak said, shoving a small pack into Danny's hands. Basic survival gear. A water purifier, a knife, a few rations. Nothing that would help against what lived in those jungles. Danny stepped off the ramp, his boots sinking into the soft earth. The air was thick and humid, filled with strange smells and stranger sounds. Clicks and growls and rustling that came from every direction at once. "How long do you think you will last?" Sethrak called from the shuttle. "I am guessing less than an hour. The shadow moss can smell fear. And you humans reek of it." Danny turned to face him, refusing to give Sethrak the satisfaction of seeing him break. "I will last longer than you think," Danny said. Sethrak laughed, a harsh barking sound that held no warmth. "We will be watching your biosignature," he said. "I want to know the exact moment when you die. It will be the highlight of my week." The shuttle ramp closed, and the engines roared to life. Danny watched as the shuttle rose into the gray sky and disappeared into the clouds, leaving him alone on the surface of a world designed to kill him. For a long moment, he just stood there, listening to the sounds of the jungle around him. Then, somewhere in the distance, something roared, a sound so deep and powerful that Danny felt it in his bones. He needed to move, needed to find shelter, needed to survive long enough to figure out what to do next. He spotted a rocky outcropping about 100 meters away, where a dark opening suggested a cave, or at least some kind of cover. Danny ran for it, his heart pounding, his breath coming in quick gasps. He reached the cave and ducked inside, pressing his back against the cool stone wall as he waited for his eyes to adjust to the darkness. The cave went deeper than he expected, extending back into the rock for at least 20 meters. It was dry and relatively warm, and for a moment Danny allowed himself to feel a tiny spark of hope. Then he saw them, 2 eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness at the back of the cave, watching him with an intelligence that made his skin crawl. He was not alone. Something was in here with him, and whatever it was, it had been waiting. Danny pressed himself against the cave wall, his hand moving slowly toward the knife in his pack. The eyes in the darkness did not blink, did not waver, just kept staring at him with a glow that seemed almost silver in the dim light. He could hear breathing now, heavy and labored, and beneath that sound was something else, a soft whimpering. Like an animal in pain, Danny had expected a monster, a creature ready to tear him apart and feast on his bones. He heard instead was suffering against every survival instinct screaming in his brain. Danny pulled out a small flashlight from his pack and pointed it toward the back of the cave. The beam of light revealed a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. It was about the size of a small horse, with 6 powerful legs and a body covered in armored scales that ranged from pale gray to white. Its head was broad and flat, with rows of teeth visible even with its mouth closed, and those silver eyes reflected the light like mirrors. This was a Shadowmaw, one of the apex predators of Morath 7, the creatures that had earned this planet its reputation as a death world. But this one was young, Danny realized, a juvenile that had not yet grown to its full terrifying size, and it was Herda. Thick metal spike protruded from the creature's side, buried deep in the flesh between its scales. Dark blood had pooled beneath it, and the wound looked infected, swollen and angry. The Shadowmaw watched Danny with those intelligent eyes, and instead of aggression, Danny saw something that looked almost like pleading. "Easy," Danny whispered, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "Easy there. I'm not going to hurt you." The creature let out a low growl, But it did not move to attack. It seemed too weak to do much of anything except lie there and suffer. Danny thought about what he should do. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to leave the cave and find shelter somewhere else. This creature might be injured now, but if it recovered, it could easily kill him. But Danny had never been good at walking away from something in pain. He had once spent 3 days nursing a stray cat back to health when he was a kid, and he had nearly gotten fired from a job for stopping to help an injured dock worker instead of finishing his delivery on time. That was just who he was. And being stranded on a death world was not going to change that. Okay, Danny said, more to himself than to the creature. Okay, let us see what we can do about that spike. He moved slowly, keeping his movements smooth and predictable. The shadow maw tracked him with its eyes, but did not try to attack or flee when Danny got close enough to touch it. He could feel the heat radiating from the infected wound. The spike was Vesheri design. He recognized it from the weapons the guards had carried on the station. Some hunter had shot this creature, probably for sport, and left it here to die slowly. Danny felt a flash of anger at the cruelty of it. This is going to hurt, he told the creature, knowing it could not understand his words, but hoping his tone would communicate something. But I need to get this out of you, or you are going to die. Do you understand me? The shadow maw let out a sound that was almost like a sigh, and its head dropped down to rest on its front legs. Danny took that as permission, opened his medical kit and found what he needed: antiseptic, bandages, a pair of pliers that he could use to grip the spike. He worked carefully, cleaning around the wound first, then gripping the spike firmly. On 3, Danny said. 1, 2. He pulled on 2. Before the creature could tense up, the spike came free with a wet sucking sound, and the shadow maw let out a roar of pain that echoed through the cave for one terrifying second. Danny thought it would turn and bite his head off, but it did not. It just lay there, panting. While Danny quickly cleaned the wound and packed it with antiseptic, he wrapped bandages around the creature's midsection as best he could, tying them tight enough to stay in place, but loose enough not to restrict its breathing. There, Danny said, when he was done. That is the best I can do. The rest is up to you. The shadow maw lifted its head and looked at him. Then, slowly, it extended its tongue and licked Danny's hand. The tongue was rough like sandpaper, but the gesture was unmistakably gentle. I'm going to call you Ghost, Danny said, looking at the creature's pale scales. Because you are white like a ghost, and because you should probably be dead, but you are not. How does that sound? Ghost made a rumbling sound in its chest that Danny decided to interpret as approval. Over the next several days, Danny and Ghost settled into an unlikely routine. Danny would venture out of the cave during the lighter hours to search for water and edible plants, always staying close enough to run back if he heard anything dangerous. Ghost stayed in the cave, resting and healing, though it grew stronger with each passing day. On the 4th day, Danny returned from a foraging trip to find Ghost waiting for him at the mouth of the caveat. The creature's feet was a dead animal, something that looked like a cross between a rabbit and a lizard. Ghost pushed it toward Danny with its nose, then sat back and watched expectantly. Is this for me? Danny asked. Surprised. Ghost rumbled again. Danny realized that the creature was trying to feed him, the same way a pack animal might feed a weaker member of its group. Ghost had decided that Danny was part of its family. Thank you, Danny said, his voice thick with emotion that surprised him. I do not know how to cook this, but I will figure it out. By the end of the 2nd week, Ghost was fully healed and growing rapidly. The creature now came up to Danny's chest, and its scales had taken on a healthier sheen. They hunted together now. Or rather, Ghost hunted while Danny watched and learned. He learned to read Ghost's body language, the way its ears flattened when it sensed danger, the way its tail twitched before it pounced. He learned the sounds Ghost made, the low rumble that meant contentment, the sharp bark that meant warning, the soft chirp that meant come here. Meanwhile, far above on the prison station. Commander Sethric sat in his quarters reviewing sensor data. The human's biosignature was still active, had been 2 weeks. And the human was still alive. That was impossible. No one survived Marth 7 for 2 weeks. Sethric dismissed it as a sensor malfunction and ordered a technician to recalibrate the equipment. Humans were weak creatures. Everyone knew that there was no way one could survive on a death world on the surface below. Danny stood at the mouth of the cave with Ghost beside him. Watching the jungle, something was moving in the tree line. Something big. Ghost let out a low warning growl, and Danny felt his heart rate spike. Then he saw them, more shadow moths, adults this time, emerging from the shadows with their silver eyes fixed on Danny. There were at least 10 of them, each one 3 times the size of Ghost, and they were coming closer. Danny stood frozen as the adult shadow moths emerged from the jungle, their massive forms moving through the undergrowth with a silence that seemed impossible for creatures so large. Each one was at least 3 meters tall at the shoulder, with scales that ranged from deep black to mottled gray, and eyes that glowed with the same silver light as Ghost's. Largest of them, a female with scars crisscrossing her snout and a commanding presence that marked her as the leader, stepped forward and fixed her gaze on Danny. This was the Alpha, the ruler of the pack, and she was deciding whether Danny would live or die. Danny's hand moved toward his knife. Though he knew it would be useless against these creatures, one of them could tear him apart in seconds, and there were at least a dozen surrounding him now. But before he could do anything, Ghost stepped forward. The young shadow moth positioned itself between Danny and the alpha female. Its body tense but not aggressive. Ghost made a series of sounds that Danny had never heard before. Low rumbling calls mixed with sharp clicks and soft whistles. It was communicating. Danny realized with amazement, actually talking to the Alpha in whatever language shadow moths used among themselves. The Alpha tilted her head, studying Ghost, then shifting her gaze back to Danny. She moved closer, her footsteps making the ground tremble slightly, until her massive head was just a few feet from Danny's face. Her breath was hot and smelled of meat, and her teeth were each as long as Danny's fingers. Danny forced himself to stand still, to meet her eyes without flinching. He had learned from Ghost that showing fear made you prey, but standing your ground earned respect. The Alpha sniffed him, her nostrils flaring as she took in his scent. Danny could see the intelligence in her eyes, the calculation as she processed information about this strange 2-legged creature that smelled like nothing she had ever encountered before. Then she did something that made Danny's heart nearly stop. She lowered her head and pressed her snout against his chest, holding it there for a long moment. When she pulled back, she let out a single low rumble and turned away, walking back toward the tree line, and the other shadow moths parted to let her pass, then turned to follow. Ghost nudged Danny with its head, pushing him forward. "You want me to go with them?" Danny asked. Ghost chirped and pushed him again. Harder this time. Danny understood. The pack had accepted him, and Ghost wanted him to take his place among them. He followed the shadow moths into the jungle, walking beside Ghost as the pack moved through the undergrowth. They traveled for what felt like hours, deeper into the wilderness than Danny had ever ventured before. Eventually, they reached a valley hidden between 2 rocky ridges, where a network of caves provided shelter and a stream offered fresh water. This was the pack's home, their territory. And now Danny was part of it. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Danny could have imagined. He lived among the shadow moths, sleeping in their caves, eating the food they caught, moving with them as they patrolled their territory. He learned their social structure, how the alpha female made decisions for the pack, and how the males competed for status through displays of strength and skill. He learned how they hunted, working together in coordinated groups to bring down prey much larger than themselves. He learned how they cared for their young, how the entire pack would protect the juveniles and bring them food until they were old enough to hunt on their own. Ghost stayed close to Danny at all times, serving as a translator of sorts between the human and the rest of the pack. The other Shadowmaws seemed to regard Danny with a mixture of curiosity and cautious acceptance. He was strange. He was weak by their standards. He could not run as fast or bite as hard or see as well in the darkness. But he had saved Ghost's life, and that meant something to creatures who valued loyalty above almost everything else. Danny also discovered that he could offer the pack something they did not have: intelligence and planning. The Vexery sent hunting parties to Morith 7 every few weeks. Groups of soldiers who came to the surface to kill Shadowmaws for sport and collect their scales as trophies. Danny learned to recognize the sound of their shuttles, to predict where they would land based on the terrain. He started guiding the pack away from the hunting parties, using his knowledge of Vexery tactics to keep the Shadowmaws safe. One day, about 2 months after Danny had joined the pack, a Vexery hunting party landed in a clearing near the edge of the territory. Danny watched from a hidden position on a ridge above. Ghost crouched beside him as 5 Vexery soldiers spread out into the jungle with their weapons ready. They were laughing, joking with each other, treating this like a vacation rather than a hunt. They had no idea that they were being watched. The alpha female appeared in the clearing behind them, silent as a shadow despite her massive size. The Vexery did not notice her until it was too late. She killed 2 of them before they could even raise their weapons, her jaws closing around them with terrible efficiency. The other 3 ran, screaming, into their communicators for emergency extraction. Danny watched them flee, watched the alpha let them go because she had made her point, and he felt something shift inside him. He had seen the cruelty of the Vexery firsthand, the casual way they killed creatures who were just trying to survive. He had experienced their so-called justice, the corrupt system that had sentenced him to death for a crime he did not commit. Commander Sethrak had thrown him away like garbage, had expected him to die screaming in the jaws of a monster. Instead, Danny had found a family, and that family had shown him more kindness than the Vexery ever had. A plan began to form in his mind, a crazy, impossible plan that might get him killed. But then again, he was already supposed to be dead. That evening, Danny stood on a cliff overlooking the valley where the pack made their home. Ghost sat beside him, and behind them both, the entire pack had gathered. The alpha female stood at the front, watching Danny with those intelligent silver eyes. "I'm going back," Danny said, knowing they could not understand his words, but saying them anyway. "I am going back to the station, and I am going to make them pay for what they have done. To me, to you, to everyone they have thrown away on this planet." Ghost rumbled and pressed against Danny's side. The alpha female stepped forward and lowered her head. The same gesture of acceptance she had given Danny when they first met. Danny placed his hand on her snout. "Will you help me?" he asked. The alpha raised her head and let out a roar that echoed across the valley. The rest of the pack joined in, their voices rising in a chorus that seemed to shake the very air. Danny smiled. The Vexery thought they knew what monsters were, had no idea what was coming for them. Danny waited 3 more weeks for the right opportunity, and during that time he prepared. He studied the landing patterns of Vexery shuttles, noting which zones they preferred and what times they typically arrived. He worked with the pack, training them to recognize his hand signals and voice commands. Building on the communication system he had developed with Ghost, the Shadowmaws were faster learners than he had expected, and their eagerness to follow his lead surprised him every day. When the next supply shuttle arrived on Mars 7, Danny was ready. The shuttle landed in a clearing on the eastern edge of the pack's territory. A standard resource extraction team of 5 Vexery soldiers and 1 pilot. They were here to collect mineral samples and water from a nearby stream. Routine work that they clearly expected to be boring and uneventful. They had no idea that they had landed in a trap. Danny gave the signal, and the pack moved. The Shadowmaws emerged from the jungle on all sides, their massive forms appearing from the undergrowth, like ghosts materializing from shadows. The Vexery soldiers screamed and raised their weapons, but they were surrounded before they could fire a single shot. Then Danny walked out of the jungle And the screaming stopped. The Vexery stared at him with expressions of pure disbelief. He was human, wearing clothes that had been torn and patched a dozen times, his hair long and tangled, his skin tanned dark from months of living outdoors, and he was riding on the back of a shadow maw, Ghost carrying him as easily as a horse might carry a rider. "Good morning," Danny said, his voice calm and steady. "I believe you were not expecting visitors." "What? How? This is impossible," the lead soldier stammered, his scales turning pale with fear. "Humans cannot. Shadow maws do not." "They do now," Danny interrupted. "Here's how this is going to work. You're going to put down your weapons and surrender your shuttle to me. And in exchange, I'm going to let you live. Does that sound fair?" The soldiers looked at each other, then at the dozens of massive predators surrounding them. Then back at Danny, they dropped their weapons. Smart choice. Danny said he climbed down from Ghost and walked toward the shuttle. The shadow maws parting to let him pass. The pilot was still inside, frozen at the controls with terror in his eyes. "Out," Danny ordered. The pilot scrambled to obey. Nearly tripping over himself in his hurry to get away from the shuttle, Danny climbed into the pilot's seat and ran his hands over the controls. It had been months since he had flown anything, but the skills came back quickly enough. This was a simple transport shuttle, not much different from the cargo ships he had piloted before his life had fallen apart. "Ghost," Danny called. "Come here. Bring the others." Ghost understood immediately. The young shadow maw bounded up the loading ramp and into the cargo hold, followed by 3 other juveniles from the pack. Creatures, just big enough to fit inside, but small enough to hide in the compartments designed for cargo. The adults would not fit. But Danny did not need them for what came next. The alpha female stood at the edge of the clearing, watching. Danny met her eyes through the shuttle window. "Thank you," he said, knowing she could not hear him. "For everything. I will come back. I promise." The alpha dipped her head in acknowledgement, then turned and led the rest of the pack back into the jungle. Danny sealed the cargo hold and lifted off, leaving the stranded Veggery soldiers behind. As the shuttle rose through the atmosphere, Danny activated the communication system and broadcast on all frequencies. "Attention Vexery Prison Station," he said. "This is Danny Cole. You may remember me as the human you sentenced to death 3 months ago. I'm coming home, and I suggest you prepare a warm welcome." The response came almost immediately, Commander Sethrak's voice crackling through the speakers. "Cole? That is impossible. You are dead. Check your sensors," Danny replied. "I will be docking in approximately 10 minutes. I recommend you have your people ready, because I am not coming alone." Danny could hear the confusion and anger in Sethrak's voice as the commander ordered all security forces to the docking bay. Good, Danny thought. Let them gather. He wanted an audience for what came next. Shuttle approached the station, and Danny requested docking clearance, which was granted after a moment of hesitation. They wanted him inside where they could deal with him, where they could capture him and execute him properly this time. Danny smiled as the shuttle entered the docking bay. The bay was full of Vexery soldiers, at least 50 of them, all armed and pointing their weapons at the shuttle. Commander Sethrak stood at the front, his face twisted with fury and disbelief. Danny powered down the shuttle and walked down the loading ramp, his hands raised. "Commander," he said cheerfully. "It has been too long." Sethrak stared at him like he was looking at a dead man walking, which in a way he was. "You should be dead," Sethrak hissed. "No one survives Morth 7. No one." "I did," Danny said. "And I learned some interesting things while I was down there. Did you know that shadow maws are actually quite intelligent? They have their own language, their own social structure, their own sense of loyalty and family. They are not mindless monsters at all." Sethrak laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "What does it matter? You are here now, alone and unarmed. Your little adventure changes nothing. I will have you executed properly this time." in front of the entire station. About that, Danny said, still smiling. I am not actually alone. He put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled. A sharp, piercing sound that echoed through the docking bay. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the cargo bay doors of the shuttle burst open, and Ghost came flying out, followed by 3 other juvenile Shadowmosh. Docking bay erupted into chaos. Soldiers screamed and scattered as the creatures landed among them. Snarling and snapping, Ghost charged straight at a group of guards who were trying to aim their weapons, scattering them like toys. The other Shadowmosh spread out through the bay, causing panic wherever they went. Danny walked calmly through the chaos, Ghost falling into step beside him. The soldiers were too busy running for their lives to try to stop him. He headed for the exit that led to the command center, stepping over dropped weapons and abandoned equipment behind him. He could hear Sethrak screaming orders that no one was following. Danny smiled. 3 months ago, they had thrown him to the monsters. Now, the monsters were on his side, and he had come to collect what he was owed: justice. Danny walked through the corridors of the prison station with Ghost at his side, the sounds of chaos echoing behind them. The station's alarm systems were blaring, red lights flashing from every surface, and panicked Vesheri were running in every direction. Though one tried to stop Danny, they were all too busy fleeing from the Shadowmosh that had been released into their supposedly secure facility. The other 3 juveniles had spread out through the docking bay and adjacent corridors, causing maximum confusion without actually killing anyone. Danny had trained them well over the past weeks, teaching them the difference between threatening and attacking. He wanted justice, not a massacre. The command center was located at the heart of the station, protected by heavy blast doors and a security checkpoint. When Danny arrived, he found the checkpoint abandoned, the guards having fled when they heard what was happening in the docking bay. The blast doors were sealed shut, but Danny had expected that. He placed his hand on the control panel and entered a code, the same code he had memorized 3 months ago when a careless guard had typed it in front of him, never imagining that the human prisoner would survive long enough to use it. The doors slid open. Commander Sethrak stood in the center of the command center, surrounded by 10 guards who had not run. These were his personal security detail, the most loyal and best-trained soldiers on the station. Their weapons were aimed at Danny's chest. That is far enough, Sethrak growled, his yellow eyes blazing with hatred. I do not know how you survived or how you tamed those beasts, but it ends here. You will not leave this room alive. Danny stopped walking, but he did not raise his hands. Ghost stood beside him, a low growl rumbling in the creature's chest. Before you give that order, Danny said calmly, I think you should know that this conversation is being broadcast. He held up a small device he had taken from the shuttle, a communication transmitter that he had modified to access the station's main broadcasting system. Every ship in this sector is receiving this transmission right now. Danny continued, as is the Vexery High Council. Say hello. Commander, Sethrak's scales went pale as he realized what Danny had done. You are bluffing. Am I? Danny smiled. Let us test that theory. High Council, can you hear me? My name is Danny Cole, and I am a human who was sentenced to death by abandonment on Moor 7. 3 months ago, the charges against me were fabricated. My trial was a mockery, and I have evidence to prove it. A voice crackled through the command center speakers, cold and authoritative. This is Counselor Veth of the Vexery High Council. We are receiving your transmission. Humans, speak your piece. Sethrak looked like he wanted to vomit. Danny turned to face one of the command center's main displays and pulled up a series of files he had accessed from the shuttle's database during his flight to the station. Over the past 5 years, this station has sentenced over 200 beings to death by abandonment on Morath 7, Danny said. I went through the records. Less than half of them ever received a proper trial. Many were convicted on fabricated evidence. False testimony or no evidence at all. The file scrolled across the screen. Case after case of prisoners condemned to die without due process. Commander Sethrak personally oversaw most of these sentences. Danny continued. And in many cases, he profited from them. Prisoners' cargo was seized and sold. Their ships were stripped for parts. Their possessions were auctioned. This station is not dispensing justice. It is running a murder operation for profit. Lies, Sethrak shouted. This human is a criminal who escaped his lawful sentence. Nothing he says can be trusted. Then explain these, Danny said, pulling up another set of files. Financial records showing payments from shipping companies to this station in exchange for eliminating their competition. Logs showing that seized cargo was sold through black market channels, communications between you and corrupt officials arranging for specific targets to be arrested and sentenced. The evidence was damning. Page after page of corruption and cruelty. Danny had found it all in the station's own systems, poorly hidden by administrators who never imagined anyone would survive long enough to expose them. High Council, Danny said, turning to address the unseen audience. I am not asking for revenge. I am asking for justice, not just for myself, but for the hundreds of beings who were sent to die on that planet without a fair hearing. There was a long silence. Then Counselor Veth spoke again. Commander Sethrak, you are hereby relieved of duty pending a full investigation. Station security will take you into custody immediately. Sethrak's face contorted with rage. No, he screamed. I will not be brought down by a human guards. Kill him now. But the guards did not move. They had heard the High Council's order, and they knew that following Sethrak now meant the end of their careers and possibly their lives. One by one, they lowered their weapons and stepped away from their commander. Sethrak was a lone ghost step forward, positioning itself between Danny and the former commander. The creature's silver eyes were fixed on Sethrak, and a low, threatening growl filled the room. You threw me away, Danny said quietly. You called me weak. You called my species pathetic. You said I did not belong in this part of the galaxy. And maybe you were right about some of that. I am not strong like a Vexery. I cannot survive in vacuum. I do not have claws or scales or natural weapons. He stepped closer to Sethrak, close enough to see the fear in the commander's eyes. But I have something you never expected, Danny continued. I have the ability to make connections, to find common ground with creatures you see as monsters, to turn enemies into allies. That is what humans do, Commander. We adapt, we connect, we survive. Station security arrived moments later to take Sethrak away. The former commander did not resist. His spirit broken by the complete collapse of everything he had built. Danny watched him go, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. It was over. The High Council contacted Danny directly in the hours that followed, offering formal apologies, compensation for his wrongful imprisonment, and full clearance to leave Vexery space whenever he wished. Danny listened to their offers, then made one of his own. I want protected status for Morth 7, he said. No more hunting parties. No more executions by abandonment. The creatures on that planet are intelligent beings, not monsters to be slaughtered for sport. That is a significant request. Counselor Veth said, it is also the right thing to do. There was another long silence before the counselor responded. Agreed. Morth 7 will be designated as a protected sanctuary, and we would like to offer you a position as the official liaison to the planet. Should you be willing to accept? Danny smiled. I accept. 1 week later, Danny's shuttle descended through the gray clouds of Morth 7. This time, he was not a prisoner, being thrown to his death, but an ambassador returning home. Ghost was waiting for him at the landing site. Along with the rest of the pack, the alpha female stepped forward as Danny walked down the ramp, and he placed his hand on her snout in greeting behind him. The shuttle's cargo hold contained supplies, medical equipment, and technology that would help him build a proper research station. He had work to do. Bridges to build between worlds that had never understood each other. But for now, in this moment, Danny simply stood with his pack and looked out at the jungle that had taught him what it meant to survive. The Vexery had thrown him to the monsters, expecting him to die. Instead, he had found a family, and together, they had changed everything.